Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first dev diary of the new year. To celebrate, we're starting on a new project that addresses the age-old argument of difficulty. Now, experiences like FromSoft's Soul series tend to bring up the conversation of difficulty and how to best approach such an issue. Some want a challenge, and others just want to have some fun. Now, neither is wrong, despite, the conversation often leading to some pretty heated opinions. Anyway, I've been sitting on this idea of difficulty for a while now, and I'd like to try making it a reality. So we'll be creating something inspired by the idea of difficulty. The goal of the project will be to create a difficult experience that can be finely tuned based on the player's preference. Each time the player dies, they will be prompted to either start over from the beginning or alter something to make the experience easier. Now, in order to give the player choice, we were going to need a working menu. So the first thing to do was to implement and modify my button system. In case you're not familiar with my button system, it's pretty simple. It takes 4 values: a button's X position, Y position, width, and height. These values are stored as an array within DSList entries. Why not another array? I don't know. Anyway, that data is then used elsewhere, usually via a loop of some sort. This allows for easier management of mouse hotspots as well as displaying of said buttons. And in terms of things that the player can alter, I started with the basics: player's max health, player's damage output, boss's max health, and boss damage output. I'm also toying around with the idea of making deaths a currency for this system. Anyway, a simple switch would determine the results of each menu option, and storing alterations in an array rather than variables also makes this process way easier. The buttons for this alteration menu were then added, and yes, I refer to this menu as an upgrade menu because I don't know. Next, the mouse's position was recorded and then checked against our list of buttons. The choice was then clamped to restrict options to just menu items. That choice is then passed on to the alteration function to change the appropriate option. The buttons were then drawn to the screen, which again was very simple thanks to the button system. The stats were also drawn to the screen to make this process easier to keep track of. And the results were exactly what we were after. Each of the 4 buttons were clickable only within their squared regions, and would affect the corresponding stats when clicked. So back in the code, variables were added for player and boss health. Then another function was created to handle the player's behavior when taking damage. If the player dies, they would be awarded 1 death point, and it would then load a prompt asking the player if they would like to alter something. This prompt would come in the form of another menu. This menu would only need 2 buttons. The first button would restart the room, resetting everything back to square one, while the second button would load the alteration menu. This new menu was then also drawn to the screen, and which menu would be displayed would be handled via switch cases. Then, to get a better idea of how this would actually play out, a simple projectile was created. The projectile would simply move in its given direction until off screen, to which it would then be destroyed. A ticker would then produce each projectile every 60 frames. The player was then given our usual hurt system, and a collision with a projectile would trigger the hurt function coded earlier. And finally, an extra image was added to help signify when the player was quote-unquote dead. The results were, again, exactly what we were after. The player would take damage and when killed are given the option to alter the difficulty in some way. A 5th option was also added to increase the amount of points earned per death, which helped test just how quickly those deaths can stack up and make the gameplay easier. Now, this was definitely not the most visually exciting episode I've ever done, but a lot of important progress was made. The modifications to the button system have improved the actual usage of making clickable areas, and while no gameplay has really been added yet, this was a very solid start to this new project, especially given the crazier modifiers to come. But anyway, with that said, brings us to the end of today's dev diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already, and let me know how you've approached difficulty in your projects, or which games have done difficulty the quote-unquote right way. Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.